want to offer a thanks to all of our panelists for staying within your time limit, so we have a little time to interact one with another. And I'd like simply to throw this question out, which is the first question we were asked to address, and that is to highlight successful multi-faith collaborations that build trust and promote well-being and foster peace. And I want to be specific here. All of you have been involved in various forms of multi-faith cooperation. Some particular example of the way in which you think this one or that one has been successful. Jonathan?
Yes, I have a friend in Kazakhstan, Tolgan Muhammadjanov, who at the end of the Cold War had a vision that he should bring together the 30-odd ethnic and religious groups in Kazakhstan, where you have a large Russian Orthodox population in a Muslim country, and you still have a rich shamanic tradition and local and a variety of languages that are quite different and really different cultural modalities. People living on the steppe, people living in cosmopolitan Almaty and then the new city of Astana. And rather than just approach it as dialogue, he created a cultural celebration which now takes place once a year, and there are literally now thousands of events all across the country celebrating the diversity of cultures and religious traditions in that country. Now, that country is in a region, if you compare it with its neighbors of Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, which have all suffered ethnic and religious conflict, I believe that the difference, one of the main differences, is that contribution that this one man did by creating this initiative. And he just lit the match, and then it lit up in people's hearts. I've been there, I've seen it, I've seen the authenticity of it. And so that's just a small example in a region in which we don't think of as a region in which there's a tradition of tolerance that we associate with the Western Enlightenment. But they don't have that intellectual tradition. They just brought the people together, and it worked.
Does anyone else on the panel want to contribute to this, Shaun?
I'm tempted to talk about the soccer fields of Northern Virginia, but I'm not going to do that because, frankly, in my own family's life, that's where the most powerful interfaith dialogue is actually taking place in my daughter's life. But I won't go there. One of the most fascinating stories I've learned in my long 4 months now at the State Department was a collaboration between Islamic Relief USA and what would be the least likely domestic partner with Islamic Relief in a Syrian refugee camp for Syrians in Jordan.
Well, I would say the Mormons, but I bet they are doing it.
The Mormons, indeed. Islamic Relief is partnering with the LDS Church. Wow. Yeah. Which, even as I say this, I'm still, I mean, I've talked to the Mormons and I've talked to Islamic Relief about this. It was a perfect match. Islamic Relief had the technical expertise. They had access to Jordan. The LDS Church had money and supplies and volunteers. And it was, frankly, Islamic Relief giving them access and technical capacity to evaluate their actual work on the ground that led to this, the most unlikely of collaborations I could think of in that space, which is Syria today, as you know, is perhaps the greatest humanitarian disaster in my lifetime. We have 5 million internally displaced people, 2 million refugees. Even if we find ourselves in a post-Assad world that tomorrow morning, it's going to take generations to rebuild that society. And yet here you have two fabulous groups with absolutely different skill sets have found a way to collaborate. And historically, the LDS Church is a proselytizing church. It's the heart of their mission. They have added a fourth mission to serve the poor.
Shaun, it's not the first time they did it. I mean,
no.
they came together after the tsunami in Indonesia and sent plane loads of supplies
exactly
and
right.
personnel. So they started a form of cooperation that
Now,
I'm pleased to know has gone on.
It's continued, and now the fascinating thing will be that what kind of theological discussions does this lead to? When do they? That's the thin part, frankly. But what's going to happen in terms of the ongoing conversation between deep adherents to these very different faith groups? And I'm in no position to predict, other than the fact it is going to happen. And so I think that bears watching.
Martha.
Well, it's a little different, but I offer it anyway. There's an initiative called the Divided Cities Initiative that brings together people from post-conflict societies from the different sides of the conflict, many of them different religious leaders, but all in the same room from different regions. So from Cyprus, from Lebanon, from Northern Ireland, and what I've witnessed in the meetings of these groups is actually to have the chance not to stare at each other, but to stare out is often just incredibly empowering. And also to be able to speak about the shared problems in the different contexts. So to watch people in Cyprus talk with people in Northern Ireland about whether or not a truth commission is helpful, it unlocked a whole lot of things. You know, it's kind of like an AA meeting where, you know, we're in this together. So that's one that I saw that I thought had some real promise.
Very helpful. Matthew, do you want to come in on this, or?
Well, there's a different way of looking at it, which is there is actually one durable peace agreement that ended a war that was done by religious people within our lifetimes. The civil war in Mozambique was concluded based on an initiative that was started by parish priests inside Mozambique. Now, I didn't want to jump in because it's not multi-faith as such, but parish priests in Mozambique knew that there was a resource in Rome called the community of SantEgidio.
SantEgidio.
And they brought them in, and the process started in a church with a parish priest in between the warring factions. It grew into something bigger using the resources of SantEgidio, and SantEgidio then handed it off to the UN to complete a mediation process that ended in the Rome Treaty that resolved, what was it, 18-year civil war? The other setting that I would suggest deserves greater study is the use of interreligious councils in post-conflict settings. Martha was talking about truth commissions, which we've seen work, with in some cases with great success. It's part of the reconciliation process one sees in post-conflict environments. And one of the other angles that one sees is in scenarios where religious leaders are capable of galvanizing that level of local credibility and moral authority, that they can also hope to work together in a post-conflict environment to stamp out any resurgent efforts at identity-based conflict.
Jocelyne?
I have one. I just want to say, you just told my example on SantEgidio. I have not seen it in Mozambique, but when SantEgidio is a very interesting example of trying to do diplomacy on religious base. And when I was still working in Algeria, there was this terrible civil war going on between state actors and Islamic groups, and the only international organization who could bring them together around the same table was SantEgidio. It didn't succeed as it did in Mozambique, but they were the only one. Nobody, no European representative, no international organization could do that. Only SantEgidio, because they found a way to talk a language that was making sense to all of them. So I say, yes, you have examples of this kind going on.
I think the examples can probably be multiplied, and part of our task in some way is to think of the ways, the huge number of ways in which people in rather different religious communities in this context or that have managed to find one another and create the sort of panoply of interreligious initiatives, interfaith organizations, some of them global, like the URI that you're speaking of, Jonathan, or Religions for Peace, used to be World Conference on Religion and Peace. Even the Council for the Parliament of World Religions managed to bring people together in an extraordinary kind of populist way. Some of whom are religious leaders, but many of whom are just citizens of 150 countries around the world who think that this is an important thing to do. The only example I would bring, or there's so many from my own experience, but the Pluralism Project in the US has actually studied interreligious initiatives in our own country. Not so much a country of crisis, although we have our own crises, to be sure. But one example in Omaha, Nebraska, where the Muslim community, the Reformed Synagogue and the Episcopal Diocese have actually bought property together to begin to create a tri-faith campus. And they worked on this for a number of years. And, you would imagine that this would not necessarily always go smoothly, and it didn't. In fact, in December 2 years ago, during the first crisis in Gaza, it almost completely unraveled. What happens when the issue of the sort of exchange between Israel and Palestine in Gaza is inserted into the attempts at sort of fraternity in Omaha. And it's one of the things we've written a case study about, because at that moment in time, somehow these religious leaders and people from their congregations managed to find a way of talking about the pain that each of their communities was experiencing without having to feel that then that was the only place where pain was being felt. And somehow there's very sort of small lessons that one can glean from this kind of experience. Let me turn to whatever questions you might have of one another in this discussion, and then we can turn to questions from the rest of you who are gathered here. No questions from each other. Let me sort of think about this. There are plenty of these global initiatives, and one of the things I think that we find a little bit too difficult is when we have the panoply of faith leaders from across the world who are then photographed in colorful diversity, and that becomes sort of the icon of a multi-faith moment. And yet you realize that this is not going very far beyond a kind of global gathering. And there are increasingly lots of global gatherings, and URI is certainly one of them. How do we move beyond that kind of initiative to something that really has traction?
I think that it's necessary to create a class of educated people with a global, cultural, ethically informed vocabulary and grammar that they can speak across cultural lines. So, I mean, the fact that hardly anybody that I know in the West knows that in the Quran it says that God says, I made the different peoples amongst you for the purpose of knowing one another. So pluralism is right in the Quran, and then it goes farther and says, the best amongst you is the one with the most taqwa, is the term, which is a sense of the immanence and presence of God. And God is all awareness and knowing, including those who are different than you. Now that's there in the text, and you never hear that. You never hear, and then we have no sense of how shocking it is that you find Buddhist bhikkhus who were advocating killing Tamils in Sri Lanka. People didn't have a vocabulary here to deal with that. We don't have a vocabulary of dealing with these religious issues. And when we're struck by the vacuum of global universal values, and the vacuum of that is filled with exclusivism in so many countries. And we end up with disciplines that are preoccupied with how and don't have a sense of why. We don't really have a teleology very much in our modern institutions. And by that I mean you end up, as a lawyer, this huge preoccupation. You can go through law school and never take a course in justice, which is, you end up with procedure rather than justice, or medicine without healing, or financial institutions that are based on the how of finance rather than producing goods and services, or religions without the why of transcendence and love, or producing weapons that don't provide security. So that's the preoccupation with how. And a divinity school primarily deals with issues of teleology. Why? What is the purpose? And I think that that is one of modernity's largest problems, is that we don't have a sense of common purpose and a place of discussing our deepest common purposes. And I think this would be a great service, to have a forum where the people's deepest soul passions can be discussed openly, and differences discussed, and unity celebrated.
Shaun, I see you about to comment on this.
Well, I want to sort of pivot from that to something Martha said that I think is related, and that is the convening power. I mean, it really is true, with the possible exception of the White House. Harvard has a convening power globally, and maybe even more than some White Houses. Let me just add that caveat. And particularly for the private, or the conversation where there aren't cameras and nobody's taking attendance. I mean, the discourse in D.C. is so poisonous now that if people learn you came to have a meeting with me, then somebody's blogging about it saying that idiot met with her. And so people are very, very hesitant to come together and have this kind of really deep experience where someone can say, I don't accept your worldview. Really, I disagree with your worldview, but we live in the same country. How can we stop from killing each other? And so I'm intrigued by your comment about not only the open doors, but the closed doors. I mean, I can think already there are several groups of people I would love to have had in the same room, but I can't do it in Washington. I can't do it in the State Department. And yet you may be able here to create that safe space where people are not going to bare their souls when they think somebody on the outside is writing it down and going to be blogging about it. And I think that prevents a lot of the real discussion from going on. So I first of all, I applaud you, but can you say a little bit more about what that might look like in an interdisciplinary fashion? And maybe you do this already. I don't know.
I'm looking at the dean here. You have thoughts?
It's not always so easy at Harvard, I would say, as well. I mean, in our early years, the Pluralism Project used to regularly convene advocacy groups from different religious communities in the U.S. The Council on American Islamic Relations, the Anti-Defamation League, the group that was eventually the American Hindu Foundation, groups that had real issues with the problems that their co-religionists were experiencing in various places. Now, I mean, there are a lot of those people who will not sit at the same table together. And eventually the Anti-Defamation League said, no, we can't come anymore because the Council on American Islamic Relations will be there. These were closed sessions.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, there are preconditions by who will even sit at the same table.
That's right.
And that can be a real issue. I would say one other thing is that over a number of years, and it was an easier conversation, we had a group of women who came to Harvard, again the convening power on women, religion, and social change from South Africa and the West Bank and Israel and Egypt and India and Thailand, and women who were very involved in the sort of movements for significant social change within their own countries. That was a very difficult discussion. It was over the course, twice we had them, once in the 80s and once in the 90s, much older. And the temptation is to have them all back again because now they're in their 80s, most of them. But the discussion over a period of days, which you probably have experienced in a number of contexts, where you can't just come to a panel or come to a two-day meeting and then go home and forget what you have said, but you know, or whom you have offended, but you really have to stick with it. And there were some pretty difficult and taxing discussions. Then we have to say, well, what are the outcomes of this? I don't know. I mean, you know, I do think that interfaith dialogue among women has a little less of the entrenchedness that some of the men have, especially the ones in their outfits. But
If I can just pick up on that,
Yes,
you're absolutely right in the sense that once the panel is done, you need a driving force to create a broader, that's what Martha was aiming to, how do you go from a presentation with, discussion?
Yes.
And I think you need a driving force, and I think institutions could do that here. And it means that it's not just one thing, it's being able to, after this event, to create some conditions for networking and the willingness to keep the discussion going. So this is the most important point here. It's not just, we cannot solve anything in one of these.
I'd take it a step further. Dialogue processes, by definition, do not necessarily result in outcomes. Mm-hmm. They're processes. They are not negotiations. They are not mediations. Mm-hmm. And so if you come to something that you want to describe as a dialogue process with the underlying assumption that there will be an outcome, you've already put yourself into a disadvantaged position. It's about the interchange of ideas.
But Matthew, you already said that the first place you would turn in some of the most difficult places is to the program on negotiation.
Yes.
Negotiation has its role, to be sure.
It does.
And dialogue
And
distinguished
dialogue
from that?
processes are a part of that family of conversations. There is an example of the situation in Tajikistan, the 1990s, where there was civil war in Tajikistan, but it was largely a sporadic effort that now has, of course, been overcome. There was a 10-year dialogue process in Tajikistan as a prevention mechanism. 10 years. They might have the occasional document describing an agreement amongst multiple parties, but there was never any grand peace agreement. It was a process. And so that's an important underlying assumption to take on, that dialogue processes are part of the family of conversations that PON can teach about. But it's something that we, and especially in this context, is extremely important.
Martha?
Well, it's just a couple small thoughts. One is that creating the context in which people will have repeated occasions to connect with each other is challenging, but it can be done, especially if you start with people who are on the younger side or earlier stages in their careers. I think that if Harvard or another institution created some kind of a process in which there was a project and you make a commitment and it evolves over time, actually, even to have a credential is not a bad thing. So that's one thought. A second thought is that I've seen students, my own students, talk with each other they share a country, they would never talk in their own country. Mm-hmm. This happens here over and over again, and I think that's a resource if we could figure out a way to build on it much more. A third small thought is that take subjects that are not themselves about religion or conflict, but maybe are about environmental sustainability or poverty or other subjects like that. And I don't think we think systematically about, well, what's the religious dimension of this, or who are the religious contributors to this discussion? This university has initiatives in each of these areas, but I don't think they think about the religious dimensions. That's a role for the Divinity School to contribute, and I think then to harvest the fruits of that kind of work would also itself be very worthwhile.
I'm aware of the fact that we have promised to turn to all of you for questions and comments. We're not asking you to write them down, but I'll try to articulate them as clearly as I can, but please try to be heard in this room as well. Yes, sir. Would you identify yourself?
Robert Chu, I'm a member of HILR, that's Harvard Institute for Learning and Retirement. Used to be a former professor of computer science. And my comment is about the importance of your comments here. It's really terribly important. However, there's been no mention of non-religious people. the non-believers, the agnostics, the atheists, and the people who hate religion because of the damage that has been done over the ages. And I'm wondering what percentage of people in the U.S., and of course there's not an on or off, you're not religious or not religious, there's a tremendous spectrum there. But what is the percentage of in this U.S. versus Europe, especially Europe? There's so much non-religion, and not many people go to church, et cetera, whether that speaks of religion or not. But I'm wondering what these percentages are and how they would affect negotiations and when people detest religion. That's an important factor. I think one of the things at Harvard is that the humanist society as a way to bring people together that could be expanded upon, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, would you like to respond to that, Jonathan?
Yes, in the United Religions Initiative, we are specifically incorporating the humanist perspective precisely because of those reasons. And my thoughts about this and this idea of a center, it should also be called an intercultural and interreligious center, not just for conflict prevention and conflict resolution, but for enrichment. And so it's the process of learning the skills of seeing from another's point of view. And I also think these different modalities, like Matt pointed out, that negotiations have a goal. Dialogue is a different goal. Dialogue is a tool that's used in negotiations, but negotiations have a goal. But there's a negotiations project at Harvard. It would be great to also have a dialogue project. And in a Divinity School, you can also deal with communion, of people having deeper dialogue, sharing experiences, and a place in which humanists and religious people can debate out. But the goal in all of it, is building a vocabulary, a cultural vocabulary, where people will be able to prevent worldviews from clashing and emphasize common ground. Now, Harvard there's many areas in which different modalities, people who learn labor relations negotiations. There's entire schools of psychology now. I mean, the University of Pennsylvania has a program where they're investigating happiness, and the country of Bhutan has a gross happiness index. Well, they found out that people are happier when they live in community in which they can communicate with different people. That's part of what makes people happy. So there's now a whole broad range of skills that could be brought to the table.
Shaun, would you like to respond to this also?
Yeah, I would simply say, based on my tenure here, in any given classroom at Harvard Divinity School, there was no presumption of specific belief. In fact, there were many classrooms where it was very clear you were in a minority, if in fact you had a specific identifier. So that inclusiveness lives in these halls. I mean, I never experienced any sense of alienation or segregation or condemnation for people who brought, frankly, no faith, but an avid interest in the subject. So I think that is actually a real resource, at least at this graduate school, where I sensed no animosity or sensed any ostracizing of students because they would clearly present their own lack of personal belief.
Well, the other thing that's very interesting here is that first we have the Pew Research Foundation that actually has done a great deal of research on your question about how many of us here and elsewhere would describe ourselves as none, N-O-N-E, having no particular religious community. And that is, on the upswing among everyone, but especially among young people. Among young people, it's about 1 in 4. But the other thing is that that humanist chaplaincy here, it includes many people who want to be, as non-religious people, very engaged in religious dialogue. Mm-hmm. And that's a phenomenon I think that everyone would welcome. Mm-hmm. Someone else? Yes, Janet.
First of all, thanks to all. It was really an interesting panel with so many important points raised. I just wanted to make one very particular point, which has to do with perhaps a distinction between the moral resources that religious leaders can muster and conceptualize and develop as leaders in places of dispute and conflict. Making a distinction between that and on the second hand, the kinds of dialogue that have been spoken about, which certainly are going to break down barriers and make for further communication, but a distinction between that larger category of dialogue and the particular kind of dialogue having to do with worldviews and theologies. And I just wanted to say that I think it's important to recognize that so many places where there is conflict in the world, it's even under the banner often, like say in Israel and the larger Arab world, under Judaism versus Islam, where I'm not so sure that that's really, I don't think that people hate each other because of their worldviews or theology. It's about economics, it's about power, it's about land ownership. Yep. And I think that one of the things I think us as educators at the Divinity School, I'm here at the Div School myself, is to sort of sometimes point out, certainly in the process of identity making, where religion is used as a guise in the sense of identity making when it's really not, it's hard to say what is religion and what isn't. We're all aware of that problem, but we want to be careful not to raise religious conflict up as so much about theology and worldview when oftentimes it actually really isn't. Yes. And to help people, recognize that is a way perhaps of recognizing what the real issues are and disassociating them from identity. And that's something we try to do in the classroom. I'm just wondering how we reach the wider world and get people to understand this point because it's so pervasive.
Thank you, Janet. I wonder if we can take a couple more questions just so that you have a chance to speak, and then we may have to leave it at that, but it'd be good to hear your voices. Yes?
I'm going to stand up.
Just introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm going to offer another voice from the Harvard Divinity School student body. My name's Ariane Johnson, and I'm a Mennonite here studying Islam. And I thank you all for your wonderful perspectives and insights, and I'm wondering, or I'm assuming that all the Mennonite leaders, were probably unavailable, but throwing John Paul Lederach into the circle. I've just wanted to offer a couple observations and then a few little ideas for our dean right over there. At my time here at this school, I'm a third-year MDiv, and a lot of conversations with my friends and in classrooms and everything, we do such a good job here in this school of deconstructing and trying to wrap our minds around the deeper, complex issues in every situation. This practical idea of convening is such a wonderful challenge to me, and I think that it's something we really need to grasp here at the school, even within the student body, because we have potlucks where we talk about what a great environment we are in. All of these emerging leaders are here, and yet after orientation week, this beautiful week where you get together with all of the incoming students and hear their stories, we get really kind of relegated into our classes and the tracks that we've chosen, and those become our friends, the people that are in our subject areas, which is a sad thing to me. When I was applying to this school, I was looking at Harvard Divinity and Claremont because I heard from my professors in undergraduate school that these are the two schools that are really like taking the idea of interfaith education really seriously and fostering those environments on campus. And I'm wondering whether or not there are ways we can figure out how to not only convene the student body between disciplines and between the graduate schools, because the Divinity School, I'm taking a class at the Kennedy School this semester, which is just a completely different environment, and I'd really like to take politics into the Divinity School turf some days, but wondering how we can maybe implement those cooperation circles that were mentioned here as like a core element of our curriculum, and And also, as a feminist scholar, or one learning feminism, I have so much appreciation for the panels, the women professors, the visiting scholars who are brought in every year, who are doing all this research around the world and bring that to us as a student body. I'm wondering if we could tap into resources, bringing scholars from peace institutes like the Kroc Institute, or Eastern Mennonite University has this amazing conflict reconciliation transformation program. So many universities are really grappling with these issues. Could we bring scholars to us here and learn from them? And then the one third thing, I'm writing my thesis this year, and I'm trying to figure out how to create an identity map as a tool for like an online resource thing in order to like help dialogue mediation work. And I don't know anything about technology. I know I'm young, and I have a lot of friends who do, but at this school, I think we need to really figure out how to promote the classes that are really practical and needed for the work that we want to do in the world. And so I'm sure that those classes probably exist at like the business school or the law school or Kennedy School. We need to know about that. We need to be like having our schools just like promoting and correlated, and I don't know if that resonates with anyone else.
Thank you. I think, let me just assure you that your questions and comments will be taken into our dinner table conversation in just a few minutes. So I think we have time for one other from one of the students here. Yes.
Thank you. I'm not a student. Does it matter?
It's okay.
I'm not a student, but I'm a lawyer practicing international arbitration law. I'm based in New York and Istanbul, and I'm in the dispute resolution group. We lawyers, we often get appointed to mediate disputes, and we see that in the international, like in the religious conflicts as well. I'm actually wondering if there can be courses addressing to the law students to teach them international those disputes, to teach them how to resolve, to teach them how to understand interfaith collaboration, to make them emphasize, to be able to empathize with the others. We have those classes with the business schools. I took one at University of Pennsylvania, and we were in the same classroom with the Wharton students, and I think that's great. And we do that at the law firm every day. We do business negotiations. So I think that can be done for the religious conflicts, religious with a quotation mark. That was one question, especially to the dean of the law school.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll cut it here. Thank
You're
you.
very lucky the dean of the law school is here. But I'm told that actually my timer is drawing us to a close. Do we have time for one more? No? What? No, I think we should. Okay. Well, then I'll stand up as if that were a signal. So much to think about. This panel has been convened largely by Dean Hampton and Leslie Hood to think about the very issues that beset us, not only in the world, but in our country and also in the university, and what some of the ways might be seen to bring this forward at Harvard University in the years to come. We have a long history of this in some ways right across the street, the Center for the Study of World Religions, and if you ever cared to look into their charter, it is really to learn about the great religions of the world, but also to bring that knowledge into the practical affairs of the world today. And so we kind of have a charter institution that can do this, but we also have so many other people in the other faculties of the university. The law school, and it's been a great honor to have Martha Minow with us today. There's a long history of engagement with her. and our other panelists, Shaun Casey, who has now infiltrated the State Department. We're very happy to have him, and Matthew Hodes, from his long experience in conflict zones around the world, and Jonathan Granoff, United Religions Initiative, and our own Jocelyne Cesari in her work here in the Divinity School and the wider university in the study of Islam. And I think that we have a great potential here because the university not only has a great divinity school, it also has people in the law school, in the business school, and in the Kennedy School and the Center for Global Health who are critically concerned with some of the issues that we raise here. So I thank our panelists for helping us, all of us together, think ahead about what Harvard University and other universities as well might do to convene this kind of discussion and to make it an ongoing discussion. Thank you very much for coming.